All right, so I'm going to go through the chapter of Numbers. I'm just going to highlight some of the parts. It goes from chapter 1 all the way until, let's see, chapter 36. So I'm going to highlight some of the points here. So number 1, God commands Moses to number the people. So when he does that, he does it according to tribes. So just for example, Reuben was 40,006,500, Simeon 50,009,300, Gad 40,005,600, Judah 314,600, Issachar 50,004,400, Zebulun 50,007,400, Ephraim 40,500, Manasseh 32,200, Benjamin 30,005,400, Dan 62,700, Asher 40,001,500, Naphtali 50,003,400, and then Moses and Aaron and the princes of Israel being 12 men. So altogether it was 603,550. 603,550. Then God goes in to separate the Levites as the priests to be taking care of the tabernacle and all of the vessels within the tabernacle. Then the Lord is explaining to Moses how the tents are supposed to be set up in terms of north, south, east, and west, in terms of which tribes are going to be facing which direction. And the Levites are not going to receive land because they're dealing with the tabernacle. Then he goes into chapter 5 about the unclean people are removed physically from the camp. So if anybody had an issue of leprosy or they were found guilty of committing some type of sin, then they would confess their sin of which they had done, and then they would make a some type of offering, a fifth part thereof, to whomever they had trespassed against. So there would be some type of atonement, and then they would be sent outside of the camp. Then there was the discussion about if someone was unfaithful, and so there was these things were discussed as a jealousy offering, an oath of cursing, and the woman would be required to drink this water, and if it was bitter, then she would be puffed up and her belly would swell and her thighs would rot, and she would be deemed cursed by her people. Then it goes into the law of the Nazarites, that if you were a Nazarite, you would not be drinking any wine or vinegar or strong drink or any liquor or any grapes or any dried foods, and nothing of the corn or of the husk. You would never cut your hair, so your hair would be the length of however long. And if for whatever reason a Nazarite would somehow become unclean from touching a dead person, etc., he would have to shave his head, and on the 7th day then there would be an atonement for him as well. Then they talk about the actual tabernacle and the altar, and how the 7 lamps on the menorah would be lighted. And then we get into chapter 9 of Numbers, and this is where the Passover is commanded again. So again, the Lord spoke unto Moses, and in the 14th day of the month, verse 3, at even ye shall keep in his appointed season, according to all the rites of it, and according to all the ceremonies thereof, that you keep it. That Moses spoke to the children of Israel that they should keep the Passover, and they kept the Passover on the 14th day of the first month in the wilderness at Sinai, according to all that the Lord commanded Moses. And if they were defiled by a dead body, they could not keep the Passover on that day, and then they were later, a month later, able to keep that Passover. The movement of the camp and how they moved was according to the cloud of glory that the Lord provided. They also had silver trumpets that they blew, such as the ram horns as well. The people were lusting, all of the Israelites were lusting for meat, and they were hating the manna and quail that God was providing them. And so as the people were murmuring, the anger of the Lord increased, and Moses was also displeased. So later on, God does send the quail. Moses appoints 70 people to look over again of breaking down, like managing people by 1,000, 150, 10 people. And God rebukes Aaron and Miriam because Aaron was speaking against Moses because Moses had married an Ethiopian woman, and so there was some discussion about that. And then Miriam has leprosy, and she's sent out of the camp. They then move go into Canaan, where they're going to claim the land that God had shown them, the promised land. And there's activities of the spies, and so some of the spies return from searching for the land for 40 days. Notice that number, 40 days. And essentially, these particular spies give an unfavorable, negative report. And even though the land had milk and honey, they report back to Moses, and they tell him that even though it flowed with milk and honey, the people be strong that dwell in the land, and the cities are walled and very great. And moreover, we saw the children of Anak there. And the Amalekites dwell in the land, and the Hittites, and the Jebusites, and the Amorites, and the Canaanites by the sea on the coast of Jordan. And so so the negative report that they were giving, they're saying, we are not going to be able to go up against these people because they're so big and stronger than we are. And they gave an evil report for the land. And when they were reporting this, again, they were talking about the Philistines, and the fear, and whether the names were giants, Nephilim, Amalekites, Anakians, Nephilim, large people. The whole point is, God was saying, go in there, but they came back with fear and doubt, okay? They believed that they couldn't do it, and all of those people that doubted, they died. So be mindful to listen to what God says and not what you want. And all the people that gave an unfavorable report, they died by a plague. But Joshua and Caleb, they lived still. Then the Lord goes in to give a meal offering and a drink offering, and this is where God establishes all of the burnt offerings by fire, the drink offerings of wine, and the meat offerings, the flour offerings, sin offerings, punishment for a presumptuous person, the wearing of the blue and white threads on their clothing as a remembrance, the borders showing that you are children of Israel, and I'm going on. And at this point, because of their constant murmuring against Moses and Aaron, many of the children of Israel are going to die in the plague, and that will be 700. Aaron's rod blossoms, and this is so that the Lord is making the stopping of all the murmurings that the children of Israel are doing. Okay, and then again, reminding us that the Levites, priests, are not going to inherit any land. Then they're talking about the rituals of the unclean and water rituals, and then the transferring of the role of high priest, of Aaron as a high priest, to Eleazar. And then the brass serpent on the pole is saving the people from all the snake bites. And again, the people were supposed to look at that pole, and as they looked at the pole, pray to the Lord, he would take the sin of the snake bites away from them, and they would not be, even if they were bitten, they would still live. So all of these things are foreshadowing of what is to come. Again, the brass serpent on the pole is also to look at Jesus, on the cross and saving us from the snake in the Garden of Eden. I'm going to skip over some of these until we get to Moses asks God to appoint his successor, and Moses appoints Joshua, and he lays his hands on him, and the Lord commanded the hand of Moses, and then Joshua becomes the next leader. Again, in Numbers 28, we are being reminded again to observe the Passover and Pentecost for the spring feasts. And again, in the 14th day of the first month is the Passover for the Lord. And the 15th day of this month is a feast. 7 days shall you eat unleavened bread to be eaten. And it's a holy convocation on the first day. And on the 7th day, it's a holy convocation. You're going to offer sacrifices by fire, the burnt offerings, and flour, and lamb, and sin offering, burnt offering, drink offering, day of first fruits, new meat offering, no work, holy convocation, oil offering, and all of this is to make an atonement for you before the Lord. He then goes on to talk about the fall feasts and Feast of Tabernacles, and that these vows are not to be broken. One of the things that that he was referencing was that when you make a vow unto the Lord and you're swearing an oath to bind your soul with that bond, you should not break your word, and you should do all that proceeds out of your mouth. So keeping your word. And in this part, it was verse 12 in Numbers chapter 30, verse 12. And this was about, here we go, verse 9. But if every vow of a widow and that of her that is divorced, wherein they had a bond of their souls, shall stand against her. And if she vowed in her husband's house, or bound her soul by a bond with an oath, and if her husband heard it, and held his peace at her, and disallowed her not, then all her vows shall stand, and every bond where she bound her soul shall stand. But if her husband utterly made them void on the day that he heard them, or then proceeded out of her lips concerning her vows, or concerning the bond of her soul, shall not stand, and her husband has made them void, and the Lord shall forgive her. And in that particular verse, I had to put myself in that, as I was engaged to be married to someone, and I kept my agreement, but he did not keep his. And therefore, that verse says that I am freed. So again, the husband that fails to keep his word bears her inequity and his inequity onto the man. Okay, then there's discussion about how to divide spoils after conquering a land, voluntary offerings. And again, we get to Numbers chapter 33. Again, notice the number 33. And verse 50, the Canaanites are to be destroyed. And the Lord spake unto Moses in the plains of Moab by the Jordan near Jericho, saying, Speak to the children of Israel, and say unto them, When you are passed over the Jordan into the land of Canaan, then you shall drive out all the inhabitants of the land from before you, and destroy all their pictures, and destroy their molten images, and quite pluck down all their high places. And you shall dispossess the inhabitants of the land, and dwell therein, for I have given you the land to possess it. And you shall divide the land by lot or by inheritance among your families, and the more you shall give, the more inheritance, and the fewer you shall give, less inheritance. And every man's inheritance shall be in the place where his lot falls, according to the tribes of your fathers you shall inherit. But if you will not drive out the inhabitants of the land from before you, then it shall come to pass that those that you which you let remain of them shall be pricks in your eyes, thorns in your sides, and it shall vex you in the land where you dwell. Moreover shall it come to pass that I shall do unto you as I thought you to do unto them. Powerful words. Again, that's Numbers 33, verse 50. Then he talks about the borders of the land, the names of the men who are going to divide the land, and he talks specifically about murder. And if you murder somebody with iron or stone or wood, that you are a murderer, and that the congregation is going to judge you between the slayer and the revenger, and over the blood of that has harmed. And then there is again a reminder about the daughters receiving the lands of inheritance. Certain daughters, their father did not have any sons, and so the daughters then inherited the land that was of the fathers. And then if those daughters then married, their inheritance would be put into the inheritance of the tribe in which they were married into or received into. And so then their original inheritance will be taken away from the inheritance of the tribe of their fathers. So let them marry to whom they think best, only to the family of the tribe of their father shall they marry. And if they were married into the families, whatever families they were married into, then those families receive their inheritance from that tribe of that family. And that is where Numbers ends. It's a lot of information. Again, I'm just giving you the highlights of it. If you read it, again, it's it's powerful. I think the main thing that really, jumped out to me at this point is just that when the spies gave a negative report, and that when they doubted God, and when they doubted, and gave this negative report, they were cutting themselves off from their own blessings, because they weren't believing that God was going to have victory for them through them. And I think that's just a main point, that if we don't listen to God and we think that we're going to do it in our own right and might, or we're just going to not do it because we think it's too hard, then we are going to die by plagues. We are going to die by not listening and staying stuck in our negative murmuring. So to be mindful of that and to move forward out of the negativity into the positivity and the belief that the Lord is for you. The Lord wants to give you blessings, and that means that you need to keep in the victory, positive mindset that the Lord is going to pull you through. So I hope that helps, and I hope you have a good rest of your Passover.